Well, let's stay on a similar story now. Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula says the cruise ship, the MSC Orchestra, that left for Mozambique from Durban will be isolated and treated as a quarantine vessel. But KwaZulu-Natal Premier Sihle Zikalala has defended the decision by the popular Durban Cruise liner to set sail. Well, it left Durban after President Ramaphosa's declaration of a national disaster. KwaZulu-Natal has 18 confirmed coronavirus cases. The Premier Sihle Zikalala joins me now on the line. A very good evening to Premier. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, and thanks for having us.
So, Premier, I think the big question at this point is, how is it that this cruise liner was allowed to leave the port of Durban even after the President issued a clear directive on travel?
I think it was maybe a lack of communication, because the directive was communicated the day before, and I think by that time all bookings and everything had been made. But secondly, it was communicated as if the ban on traveling will be effective as from 18th. But they have since communicated with us as government and registered their sincere apology, and they are prepared to adhere to all regulations. So we agree, we are in agreement with Mbalula that when they come back, those people will need to be tested, quarantined, and go through proper examination before they are discharged.
Premier, so I'm sure there are many questions that are being raised at this point, because I'm sure you would agree with me that this should not have happened. How many people were on board that cruise liner? And as far as I'm gauging from what you're saying, it's quite clear that none of those individuals on board that cruise liner were tested.
Well, we will not be able to confirm whether they were tested or not. What we know is that this cruise liner takes a lot of people, and therefore all of those people, when they come back, they will have to be tested before they are allowed to join their families and the society. We are adhering to the directive by the President, and the company, MSC, communicated with us their apology, but were firm on the point that they will have to adhere to the regulations and the directive that have been put in place.
Premier, let me tell you what my concern is about this particular issue. You're saying that there must have been some miscommunication, and this is miscommunication pertaining to people's lives. So individuals on this cruise ship, you're not sure if they were tested, they're going to the Portuguese islands, docking, and roaming around in Mozambique. Do you agree with me that this should not have happened? The President was very clear in the directive that he had given, and yet there this cruise liner ship was. It set sail from the port of Durban, and from the looks of things, you cannot even confirm if any of those individuals were tested. They're going to be roaming around in other countries with other individuals, yet we're sitting with a global pandemic crisis.
We are quite in agreement with you. This is a serious thing, but we are communicating what they have related to us as the company. And we affirm that we all have to observe and follow the directive from the national government. It was a mistake on their side to leave, but they have since communicated with us and apologized, and they are clarifying themselves. And we are saying, on top of that, when they come back, they should be quarantined.
You talk about quarantine, so will they be quarantined on that ship for 14 days?
It's what we'll have to work out with the Department of Health in the province and see how do we effect all matters. But we are aware that the ship is coming back on Friday, and that's why we are saying tomorrow Minister Mbalula will be here in the province, and among others, we will be visiting the port, and we believe that proper process to deal with their situation will be outlined. And I think we are in agreement with him in saying that those people must be quarantined up until their state is affected.
So you're not ruling out the possibility of them being quarantined on that ship. Certainly, they wouldn't be allowed to disembark from that ship without knowing what their status is, in particular, because they're coming from other countries as well.
Yes, that's what must happen. As all citizens and people who are coming into the country, they are checked. They have to be checked as well, and they have to be put aside and isolated, checked and observed the 14 days before they are let to go to the society and their family.
All right, observe for 14 days. I also understand, Premier, that another cruise from the very same company was scheduled to leave the next day. I want to understand what consequences will there be for the cruise liner here? Are you looking at the possibility of fining them as a result of this? It was a clear directive, but the ship left.
We will not want to reach that for now, because once the minister who is responsible comes here, it's when that we will then be able to discuss and finalize those issues.
But Premier, I'm sure you would agree with me, people's lives are being gambled with here. They're being gambled with.
I'm talking about... I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
But I'm not the authority that takes a decision in that respect. The authority should be the Department of Transport at a national level. And that's why we are in interaction with the minister, who is coming tomorrow to the port and among others to attend to this situation.
Will the cruise liner, I mean, there's got to be some kind of consequences. The president of the country issued a directive, Premier. Just allow me for a second, sir. The Premier issued a directive, and a day later, the president, I beg your pardon, issued a directive, and a little bit later, you've got anything close to a couple of thousand. I've not been on one of those cruise liners myself, but I can certainly tell you that there are a couple of thousand people on those cruise liners. I mean, how does this even happen? I don't understand.
Yes, that's a concern we are raising. It was a sense of irresponsibility and consequences. We need to ensure that we enforce consequence management, and we need to ensure that they take full responsibility of this. But we cannot be able to say what will happen, because that is not our mandate. It's a mandate of the department nationally.
I'm sure you'd agree with me then, Premier, without consequence management, things like these will certainly slip through the cracks there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, the KwaZulu-Natal Premier Sihle Zikalala, not ruling out the possibility of all those on board that cruise liner that left the port of Durban just a day after President Cyril Ramaphosa had issued that directive. Once they returned back to the country, they would need to be tested, and they're not ruling out the possibility of all those on board that cruise liner being quarantined for 14 days. Francis?